My name is Caroline Older, and I am the Ragdale Foundation's new Executive Director. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. If you don't know Ragdale, I want to take a moment to share with you a little bit about it. Now in its 44th year, Ragdale is an artist residency located in Lake Forest, Illinois, that annually welcomes more than 200 authors and artists of multiple disciplines to its 5-acre campus, giving them the time and space to advance their creative work. Additionally, Ragdale's commitment to community and arts education underpins public projects and our Ragdale in Schools program. If you are an alum, a trustee, a member of the Ragdale team, or a general literary enthusiast, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I am honored to be able to introduce you to Rebecca Makkai, tonight's moderator. Rebecca is the author of the novels The Great Believers, The 100-Year House, and The Borrower, as well as the short story collection, Music for Wartime. The Great Believers was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award and received the ALA Carnegie Medal and the LA Times Book Prize, among other honors. Makkai is on the MFA faculties of Sierra Nevada College and Northwestern University, and she is Artistic Director of Story Studio Chicago. Additionally, Rebecca is an alumna of Ragdale and a member of its Board of Trustees. Rebecca is going to introduce you to tonight's authors and take it away from here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. This is a delightful way to spend a Wednesday evening. And as a lot of you know, this in no way replaces Novel Affair, but we were very sad in the spring to lose Novel Affair, which would have been our major fundraising and donor event, our major way for all of you to interact, particularly with writers. As you know, Ragdale also brings in musicians. You just heard that beautiful intro music, visual artists, dancers, performing artists. But that's the one event in the year where we really highlight the written word. And all those authors that we were going to bring in this spring are on hold, very much hoping to bring them back in the future, whenever that may be. But we're doing sort of a mini version of that maybe for you tonight with 3 amazing authors, all of them somewhat local, some more local than others, and all of them wonderful people whom I know personally and was really excited to invite. So in, I guess, alphabetical by first name is how we're doing this, because that's the order I have things here. I'm going to introduce you first to Alex Kotlowitz, who has been writing for over 40 years. He's the author of 4 books, most recently a book called An American Summer, Love and Death in Chicago, which I'm sure he will tell you about in a minute. His, I think safe to say, most famous book is the national bestseller, There Are No Children Here, which was selected by the New York Public Library as one of the 150 most important books of the 20th century. It was adapted into a television movie produced by and starring Oprah Winfrey. His other books are The Other Side of the River, and his book on Chicago, Never a City So Real, which I believe has been out for quite a while, was just released in paperback recently. He's also a filmmaker, and hopefully we'll hear a bit more about that tonight. And he used to live in the burbs, but he is now a full-on Chicago resident. Alex is also, of these 3 authors, the one who has spent significant time at Ragdale. He's been our guest for previous Novel Affairs, has stayed at Ragdale, and I'm sure that will come up later in our conversation. So next in alphabetical order by first name is Chloe Benjamin. Chloe, although she is from San Francisco, lives now in Madison, Wisconsin, which is where I've had the pleasure of meeting her, both with friends and as we've been there together for the Wisconsin Book Festival and other events. A lot of people came to know her through her second novel, The Immortalists, which of course was an instant New York Times bestseller. It was actually her second novel. Her first novel was called The Anatomy of Dreams, which did quite well in and of itself, but didn't explode the way the second one did. Chloe was also one of the people a couple of years ago when I was going to be on Late Night with Seth Meyers, because he has authors on once in a while, I just started rewatching every author interview that I could that he had done. And Chloe's she just seemed so happy to be there. And it made me feel so relaxed knowing that this was going to be a great experience. And I think it might have even been before I met her. It was just a very reassuring thing. And I knew I'd love her too. Finally, a bunch of you have already met Michael Zapata because he and I did quite a different event a few weeks ago on the property at Ragdale, sitting outside and talking in specific about his debut novel, which just came out this spring, The Lost Book of Adana Moreau. He is the founding editor of Make Literary magazine, an important and legendary magazine. He is, I'm sorry, my screen is doing a funny thing, which is why I seem disoriented at the moment. I'll be reoriented in a second. He is also an incredible educator, taught for a long time, re-enrolled high school students, which is an amazing job. Right now, I'm honored that he is teaching for us at Story Studio, teaching a year-long novel class for us. I was not at all surprised to hear the raves start to pour in the moment he began teaching. He is a graduate of the University of Iowa and has lived in New Orleans, Italy, and Ecuador. And Chicago is way colder than any of those places. So I'm sorry, dude. So I am absolutely thrilled to have them all three join me. And this really is a conversation. Not, we aren't doing readings tonight. We're really talking, maybe as we would if we were just the four of us. And I particularly would love to talk to all of them about various aspects of the idea of what it means to be a working artist in a time of crisis. And you could argue that, the world is always in crisis, but I think we can all agree that this year has been particularly difficult. It's been, for many of us, a particularly difficult time to be making art, to be promoting art, to be talking about art. But I think most of you would agree it's been an absolutely vital time to be consuming art. The way that people are reading more than ever, people are, finding joy in whether it's an online concert or visiting an art gallery online. When you come down to it, jigsaw puzzles just only get you so far. You need something much deeper going on. So I'd love to ask all of you to start with, first of all, have you been able to write in this time? Maybe this involves talking a little bit about what you're working on currently, and what that might look like for you. And maybe I'll keep it simple at this point. Maybe we'll go from there. Chloe, do you want to start us off?
I just had this feeling that you were going to start us off. Rebecca, thank you so much for that beautiful intro to Ragdale, to my fellow panelists tonight. It's really such a pleasure to be here. And Rebecca is one of the most kind and generous literary citizens I know, and is always doing things like this to support our community and our institutions. And so I'm very grateful to you as well. Gosh, I have kind of gone through a writing crisis alongside the global crisis. I had been working on a book for about 4 years that I started in 2016, and I tend not to talk about what I'm working on, but I find myself compelled to kind of share what's been happening with it, and that is that the book is essentially an alternate history that ends in 2020. And again, it was conceived in 2016. And as 2020 has approached, even last year, but especially this year, I have felt the immense pressure and stress of trying to write an alternate history in real time, and essentially to convert into art what we are experiencing right now.
Wow.
And that has been so hard, and I have not felt myself up to the task, in that I need some distance. I don't know how to talk about COVID yet. I don't know how to talk about these incredibly important protests around Black lives and other social movements that are happening right now. And I need to be able to do justice to those topics if I'm going to write about 2020. So I made the very painful decision to put that book in the drawer. And I serendipitously and thankfully kind of got an idea this summer as that was happening that's taken me in a different direction that's more speculative, and I think playing in the realm of something a bit more fantastical or science fiction oriented is giving me both an escape and a way to channel a lot of the existential anxiety that I'm feeling right now. So I don't know if any of our other authors relate to that, or if you find that the project you were working on before 2020 is still the project that you're working on, but that's been my journey this year.
I love that you said speculative during times of crisis. I've been thinking about that a lot, not only in terms of my own work, but going back through, my family's from Ecuador, so I'm half Latin American, and really looking at the crises that coursed through Latin America during, post-World War II, all the way up until quite recently, usually at the behest of, the American Empire. So there's this series of crises that course through literature, and I've always been really comfortable in that realm. That's what I grew up with. Talks of crises of what was happening in Latin America was my first literature around the dinner table with family friends, with my dad, from people from Mexico. If you look at the 1968 student protests, all the way through Cuba, all the way through Argentina. My family was friends with people who had escaped sort of the dirty civil war in Argentina and Chile. So the crisis right now, when it first happened, and thinking about it as a parent, thinking about it as a writer, felt strangely familiar in a way that I wish it wasn't. And so that's speculative literature that sort of coursed through Latin America. I've been thinking about it a lot and how that may impact my own work. As far as writing, during the first half of this pandemic, I did zero writing. I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. We were home. My wife teaches. She's an artist, in her own right. And so it was hard to touch paper. It was hard to touch art materials with family. And so now that we've adjusted and developed a pattern, I've been thinking a lot about history, actually, because I think it's so hard to just know what, like you said, Chloe, I really like that, because how can you know the present? And we're in the situation where the past and the future are colliding in the present. And that's, I've been thinking about that almost obsessively, and what that means for trying to create a new work. I was in the process of working on my second novel in March, which the short and long of it is it takes place in the near future. It's about a census taker in the future, right? So, and we're reading things about the census today, and that's the first place that fascists try to control. And obviously they're working on that right now. So it was hard. So it came to a full stop. And I kept obsessing over this idea of the past and the future collide in the present. I'm just now feeling more comfortable jumping back into it, but it's changed dramatically. Instead of a new world, instead of worrying about science fiction, I'm very much digging into like interiority. I'm trying to read modernists again, who survived the 1820 pandemic, who just were from World War I, who just came out of that. And I find it fascinating that their literature became very interior. And that's kind of what helped me transition to being able to sit down this month.
Yeah.
And go back to the project in an entirely different way. That meant killing about 100 pages right off the bat and starting over, but I don't see any way out of it. I similar to you, Chloe, I really became a situation where it's time to rethink and start over.
That's so interesting, because it seems like it's not only topic, but mode of telling that is changing for you, right? Like going to the surreal / speculative, or doing something more interior. We think about the modernists too, like the fracturing that went on. It was like a fractured response to this fractured time. It's form, it's not just content and subject. That's yeah. Alex, what about for you? I mean, writing nonfiction, I know, you're research heavy. Have things changed for you in this?
Oh, tremendously. I mean, first of all, I certainly identify with the struggles, Chloe and Michael, that you both had, and appreciate the fact that you're looking both in the future and in the past, because I think I mean, for me, so much of my work is anchored in the present. And so for me, I've been completely kind of knocked off balance by the rapidity at which the world seems to be spinning. And I think probably like everybody else, I'm just filled with this sense of anxiety and anger at the moment. And then the other part for me is that so much of my work is, spending time with people. And I've been completely, because of the pandemic, have been really flummoxed as to how to do that. So I had a book that I was about to begin, a book that was, I don't want to get into the story, but it was sort of asked the question about what it means to be an American. I'm actually now returning to it. But I got to say, it's been really, it's just been hard. And what I did this summer is kind of return to my journalistic roots. I am kind of obsessed with this question of what it means to be complicit. And so just wrote a piece that appeared yesterday for the New Yorker about Todd Ricketts, who is owner of the Chicago Cubs and the chief fundraiser for Trump. And so that's, the question I ask is, do you get to walk away from all this without having to account for it? But yeah, I mean, writing, I found I find doing everything really tough. Writing, reading, seeing friends.
I haven't made my bed since like April. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I think for me, it's been more, I think it certainly has changed the book I'm writing right now in terms of tone, in terms of, but I started this book really just in the past year. So I feel like it's not as if I was halfway through something that then underwent a sea change. But where I'm really feeling all of this is that I know I'm always working way out. I know what my next book is going to be. And that one, I'm doing the reading for it now. I'm doing the thinking for it now. It's very, very much formed by this moment, and by the past 4 years, but really by this year. So it's like, it's starting to ferment in this really, horrible smelling but interesting way.
I'm just curious, have all of you, I mean, for me, the other thing is just kind of a practical thing, which is just a sort of inability to concentrate, and that's been really tough.
Yeah.
I mean, I find myself just looking at the news constantly.
Yeah, well, this actually leads into a question I wanted to ask, because I want to talk about where you guys write. In particular, Mike and I both have young kids. Alex, I know you have older kids. Alex, I know that you've done things like Ragdale before, and that's for me been this incredible way, whatever's going on, to focus. But we can't be getting out to Starbucks really right now to write. I mean, I guess you could, but and Alex, since you were just talking, and I threatened you that I was going to make you talk about Ragdale, and I'm going to do that now. Do you normally write at home? And what's been your experience, working at home? I'm assuming your kids are remote schooling, or, I don't know what, and maybe, if you want to talk about what I know maybe in the distant past, what it's like to write in a place like Ragdale and how that might be different than writing at home.
Yeah, I mean, I write at home. My kids are all grown. I mean, I think that the thing I miss the most at the moment are just lunches with friends. That's yeah. And it just, I mean, I don't need to tell you guys this, but writing is such a solitary experience. And so you need the embrace of people around you. And I miss that tremendously. I mean, I was at Ragdale when I was working on my first book, There Are No Children Here. And it was in some ways a kind of transformative experience. I went there for 4 weeks. It was before I had children. And I'd never written a book before. And it was the thing I remember most about my experience there was the first time I ever read aloud. And, we gathered one evening and we would take turns each evening. And I remember I was just drenched in sweat. And there was an older writer there, Joan Colebrook, who is Australian, she and I just really hit it off. And she's kind of a curmudgeonly person, but I really liked her. And so I read and, got my feedback. And I just remember the next day, she said to me, she said, "Don't stop writing." Oh. So I knew it. I know that's all I needed to hear. And I kind of miss that from friends now, you know. In fact, I just went to meet with a writer friend the other day in his backyard. I just needed the infusion of support and affirmation. You know, I just talked through my book idea with them.
Yeah, that's sometimes what it is. It's the conversation, you know, might not be someone critiquing your work, but just like you're just, well, you bounce some ideas off of you, right?
Yeah. And Rebecca, you, I mean, you organized, you know, you helped organize this wonderful gathering, this salon where we writers from around Chicago met. And I remember when I came to this city some 40 years ago, the writing community was so disparate. And for the first time, I feel that there's, I mean, you've really been key in this, that there's really this connection among writers in the city.
That's lovely to hear. Yeah, it's something, you know, it's one of those like, yes, just as soon as we can all do this again, we will all gather for dinner parties and whatever again.
I think we need like a week-long carnival, literary carnival. Like, you know, I debuted in 2020, so like that's, I have obviously friends I'm always in contact with who live across the country, who live across in Latin America too. So I haven't. My book came out in February, and then suddenly there was a sudden quarantine in March. So all of my experiences regarding sort of like this book and readings and publicity for it and working with amazing bookstores has been in my back office, sometimes with like half-naked children running in the back. And, so the place I had finished final edits in the book is the same place I'm doing that. So I keep thinking back, like how you'd said, Alex, like just that interaction. It's so much, the solitary nature, and then not having that as a writer, I think that has changed the mode. I think the book I'm working on is coming out as like a monologue to an animal, to an ant, an A-N-T. I told Rebecca that at the previous thing, now that I'm digging more into thinking about it, I'm wondering how much of this monologue to a creature is just like me trying to get through the day, like just thinking of like, what would a 200-page monologue feel like, which is what the modernist asks, right? And I'm realizing how much solitariness happened then. So I would kill to have a lunch with friends and just talk through these ideas. People I grew up with in Chicago who would tell me when I'm full of shit and like find a better idea. I absolutely I miss that dearly, because the truth is I'm very solitary, and then something clicks in my brain, and for a month I'm very social, and to not have that has been an imbalance in my work.
Yeah.
I find, Rebecca, to your question about spaces, that it's really tough not to be able to write anywhere other than home. I mean, on the one hand, I feel incredibly lucky to have a home where I can work and a space in my home to work. But I also miss coffee shops so much more than I ever thought I would. And I really feel that part of it is just the sense of being among other bodies. Before I left my previous day job, one of the things I loved the most was just going into the kitchen or going into the copy room and encountering another person and having a 15-second conversation. This just reminded you, like, I'm human, we're taking a breather, and it's like, there's no copy room. There's not even a coffee shop where you can just be surrounded by strangers. So I think the internal monologue gets louder. I've certainly noticed that, even though, as novelists, even if we are in coffee shops or in conversation with community, we still spend a lot of time in our heads. So I think conversations like these are actually like as therapeutic for us as they hopefully are interesting for anyone watching, because we're all
having group therapy and everyone else is welcome to listen.
Yes.
I love it. Yeah, there's a butcher, but Kafka had some line about the cafe being like the absolute perfect situation for a writer, because it replicated the writer's position in the world of being completely tied to everything else, but also utterly alone. And he was talking about writing alone in a cafe, not having lunch with a friend, like just, you're there, you're in public, but you're alone. And it's, and he was not talking about Starbucks, but I wish he were.
I love that idea. I grew up in very noisy dinner tables, and that's when I felt like calmest.
Yeah.
listening to family and family friends talk, usually for a long time. And I think that replicated in cafes. I wrote a lot of this book in New Orleans, and if anyone's visited, New Orleans is a wonderful place to be trapped in a cafe. You'll have strangers talk to you for an hour, and then you can get back to work for for the time you need.
Yeah. Oh, it's great. I love it. Well, so, Mike and Alex specifically, you both had books out recently. And, Chloe, I know that for you, just the success of the Immortalists, the events tend to be ongoing for a successful book. Is that, Mike, you're saying that you're doing your promotion from the same place you wrote. And I would say that might be psychologically risky, right? Like if I were your shrink, which for the next half hour I am, I would say I don't know, facing the public, promoting your book in the same room. Of course, I'm doing the exact same thing. Yeah. But is that messing with you? And then I kind of want to hear from all of you, what's it been like connecting with readers in the midst of all this?
Yeah, it is a singular space. And I think it's been okay for the sake of I'm working at home with 2 little ones. And so the days are both beautiful and also tough. My wife's working too. So to anything that resembles quiet is like entering a spaceship, and I'm okay with it. But I definitely understand. But there's easily distractible things that happen when your space for your day job, your writing, and then your promotion all interact. So yes, I agree with you. I'm very much. In fact, we're in the process of, we bought a house and we're moving in a month, and there's a basement, and I'm just looking forward to having a finished weird new spaceship to work in, where I could commit to finishing this thing. But yes, I agree with you. It's been, the promotion aspect has been twofold, because something happened around April and May where an enormous amount of people reached out to those people who were having particularly a debut and a book released in 2020. So I've been able to meet people nationally and internationally that I just wouldn't have been able to do that. So there's been things like this that have been very nurturing and rewarding, and allow, us writers to talk. So it's just a joy to talk to everyone today. Thank you. So that's been good. But the initial gut punch of having a national tour closed was tough. But again, we're safe. We're healthy, and there are people who are organizing right now for things that are much dire. And I think I've also been able to divert one foot, so to speak, in paying attention to those current political organizations. And I think for artists right now and writers, you had asked previously, in a crisis, and the question that's been hanging over my head is, this is a perfect opportunity for a new deal too. And it's not just for writers. This is for artists. This is across the board. From those people losing homes, this is across the board for this people facing this historical crisis. My question is, where is a New Deal 2.0 that we could all, not only face this crisis together through, but also build something like a new world post-pandemic? And it's not happening, and that's been a source of sort of existential and dread.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see that happening, at least on smaller scales, like certain arts organizations that are, like what Ragdale's doing. And I think others that, because of what they're doing, if they're more on the education side, the ways they've evolved. And then, realizing oh, some of this stuff is great and we're going to want to keep it. And here's what we want to have going next time so that we don't get slammed again. So I think that, that evolution, small scale, has been often really inspiring, but then, we need to think bigger than that. Yeah. Alex, what about you? When did your last book come out?
Yeah, so I was fortunate that my book came out the spring of last year. So the paperback was out in March, and we obviously had to cancel everything, and a book tour and all that was by the wayside. But I'm okay with it, and I think too, in this odd way, Zoom in some ways has made it easier. I mean, it's been easy, events like this. I mean, I'm down with my family. I come up here for an hour, and or otherwise it'd be a whole evening away, or in some cases 2 or 3 days away. So I just think we have to sort of I look as a writer. I think Chloe and Mike, we want to be read, and so we want to find readers. And one of the ways to find readers, of course, is to meet with them personally. And short of that, I think, we've been doing it virtually, and I don't know, I've found I've been able to in some ways do more events, and it doesn't feel as personal. You don't have those conversations you would have, before or afterwards. But I would not want to have a book coming out now. That would be, I think it'd be really tough. I mean, both because of the pandemic and the politics. I just think everybody's so overwhelmed.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, and I, God bless. And if there's any, I feel bad, like if there's anyone in the audience who is a writer who has a book coming out, on November 3rd or something, God bless. But even way back, I was talking to my agent about when I wanted my next book to come out. And she was like, you really don't want it to come out in 2020 because, and she was just thinking election. She wasn't even thinking, anything else. And then she goes, well, you probably don't want one in 21 either because everyone's pushing from 20 and they're all going to come out in 21. So that's fine, but 22. So I'm hoping she's psychic and that is actually a better time because Lord knows. But
yeah, but so much is out of our control. There's
Yeah.
only so much you can do. All you can do is write and get out in the world and hope for the best.
Yeah. And it's the time of year too. One thing that's been heartening for me to see is that it's the time of year when great work, even if it flew under the radar, there's this chance for it to be recognized with awards, with lists that come out at the end of the year, with things like that. But, so we'll see. Chloe, are you doing a lot of stuff on Zoom, or are you kind of hanging back? And
I am. I mean, I've been able to engage a little bit more than so my book The Immortalist came out in January 2018, and then the paperback was in February 2019. So at this point, it's like eons ago as, the publishing world rolls. And so things that I didn't have the bandwidth for before, I can do now. And I think, with the virtual events, they kind of do two things. One, they remind you of what is so vital and powerful about in-person events, because I come from a performing arts background and I love the performing arts. And I think there is something magical that can happen when you are in a space with other people. It's almost like church, even if you're not communicating, or cafe, it's this togetherness of experience. So that, has made me, that's been a reminder, but at the same time, there's this wonderful democratization that happens with virtual events where the accessibility is transformed. So, anybody could come and watch this. Whereas if it had been in person as Novel Affair, there would have been all kinds of wonderful benefits, but also it would have been only accessible to people in the area. So I find that it kind of does both things.
Yeah.
And the flip side of that, I don't know about the rest of you, but I've been finding myself going to Zoom events myself, because it's been so easy. And I see there's some author who's speaking, and there's some historian, and I'm thinking, oh, this is, how nice. I don't have to leave my office.
It's so nice. There's this press I really adore called Charco Press, and they put out specifically Latin American literature and translation based out of the UK. And I remember pre-pandemic, I was like, they just seem to be the coolest people, in publishing. And now I've been able to, it's in UK, so I got to time it right, but I'm still able to attend those things or watch videos when they're done. And that's been just a boon. And it's also made me consider the way that writing itself now, of course, we're always talking about globalization, internationalization, but that access itself, I think, is a positive thing to come out of not only the crisis, but the technology, obviously, that we're using. It changes the way I think as a reader a lot to be able to do that.
This actually leads perfectly into my last question. And while I ask it, this would be a great time for people to put their own questions in the chat box, because I can keep asking them questions forever, but I would love to hear what you guys want to know about. And I'll sort through them. But I'm curious about what you're reading, what other art you're consuming, as an artist, just as an absorber of the arts. What are you, the four of us were joking before everyone else joined us that we were going to start some kind of Russian winter club and wear hats and read Russian novels to get through the Chicago winter, which I still think is a great idea, actually. But what are you consuming, and has it changed? Do you find yourself drawn to different things now, different types of things than you might have been before.
Nature documentaries.
Yeah.
I find myself like re-obsessed with ecology. My 3-year-old, he's entering that phase too, where walking the forest is a 3.5-hour, just lovely, parallel world. But just, very recently been digging into more. Part of I'm using it the excuse because in the book I'm working on, there's an ecologist, but mostly because it's exterior places I can't go for a long time. My family is from Ecuador, and I haven't been there in 2.5, 3 years. I usually go once or twice a year. My grandfather's 101, and he lives in a small village, and so it's just been a routine in my family life to be able to see family that often in Ecuador, which is very deep in nature, very deep in the Andes, and not being able to do that. I think watching these, I watched the David Attenborough thing. And you know what? Boo for the oil companies for almost making David Attenborough cry. There's a scene in there where I'm like, I can't believe they're making this pure human who's 93 almost cry. But it's a beautiful documentary, but a lot of those to feel connected to the things that are just so immediately closed off.
That's so cool. Oh, that's great. Chloe, Alex?
Go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to say I just finished the Overstory. So I have also been thinking a lot about trees and about sort of the non-human and the planetary crisis and all of that. I've also been as I said, I kind of have been moving into a more speculative place in my fiction. The same is true with my reading, because I feel like it's the only way to counterbalance like all the news that I'm taking in and all the just incredibly heavy, depressing elements of our real life now. So I'm like, take me to the aliens. Like when I can read, I just want it to be, when I can read for pleasure, I want to feel absorbed and transported in parts of that I can like fill up a little bit to come back to this world. And also, I don't know if anyone here has seen The OA on Netflix, but speaking of other artists, The OA is a TV show that's 8 1-hour parts, 8 hours total in the first season, and it's completely blowing my mind. And I won't even try to do justice to a summary, but it has a lot to do with kind of connection through the body as opposed to the mind, the intelligence that kind of lives, below here that we have a hard time accessing, trauma and grief and making something out of it. And I have been like just like crying. My husband's like, why are you crying? And it's just been an incredibly moving experience that I haven't had with a film or TV show like in a long time, if ever. So The OA, highly recommended.
Well, I think like both of you, actually, I found especially at the beginning of the pandemic, found myself in reading books that took me out into the wild. The place I find solace is in the North Woods, and so I read a couple of memoirs by trappers in the spring that just transported me and had me up there, if not physically, at least mentally. I think one of the things for me that's changed from my reading habits is I find myself reading now more than one book at a time, which I never ordinarily would do. But I discovered this wonderful novelist over the summer. Maybe some of you are familiar with him, but I'm new to his work. But Andrew Krivak, who wrote a book called The Bear. He wrote a book The Sojourn, Signal Flame. I just devoured his work over the summer, and I'm now in the midst of reading a friend's work, Mazu Magista's book, The Shadow King, which has been shortlisted for a Booker, and it's just transported me to another time. I mean, it's so. And I'm watching far too much TV, and I watch far too much basketball. That was my problem over this past couple of months. I'm so glad the season's over.
I love it. It's great. Yeah, hopefully people are, I think it's funny when people are talking to me knowing that I'm a writer, they're always apologizing for watching TV. And it's like, first of all, who do you think wrote the TV shows that you're watching? Like, writers write TV. Secondly, we're in the golden age right
I was going to say some of the best storytelling is
Yeah.
happening on the screen. Yeah.
now. Yeah.
I just finished the Good Place, which I'm loved. It's fun. It's philosophical. It takes you to another place. I've been reading. I want to really suggest this book, How Forests Think, since we're talking about kind of ecology.
Oh,
It's called Toward an Anthropology Beyond the Human. So Chloe, it's about ecology outside of the human realm.
Michael, we have some similar vibes going on in our work, I feel like. So I will definitely write that down.
Cool. We need lists.
This is where, if we were all at Ragdale together, then they'd start talking about their work at dinner every night, and both of them, their work would change in really interesting ways. But they can text each other after this. Before I ask, speaking of Ragdale, I was gonna say, after Alex said that, and then other people were talking, I didn't want to interrupt, but that story that Alex was telling about, like reading, from his debut when he didn't know what he was, what it would be at Ragdale. I love that so much, because I know that everyone here tonight gets it, but like when you're talking to friends who are asking about Ragdale and why would you support Ragdale, and like why do we need this place that supports people whose work isn't even out yet? I'll just buy the book when it's out. And it's like, this is a guy who had not published a book yet, who's working on his debut, and it ends up being one of the 150 most important books of the 20th century. Like, you got to think way out, right? You invest in the art while it's being written. You consume the art later, but you invest in the art ahead, and it's just the perfect story. We have one question in the chat box, which is for Alex, from Julie, which is, could you talk a little bit about your New Yorker article on the Ricketts, and how difficult was that to gather information? Was there pressure not to write about the Ricketts family and Trump? Did you have support?
Right. Yeah. So the piece actually focuses on Todd Ricketts, who's the youngest of the four siblings, because he's the one who's Trump's chief fundraiser. This story was out of my bailiwick. I'm usually reporting and writing on people who are sort of along the margins, and here I'm writing about somebody who's among the powerful. And I've got such great respect for my colleagues like Jane Mayer and Evan Osnos, who write about the rich and powerful, and I've never really succeeded well at it, but I just felt determined at this point in time that it's something I felt obligated to do, and especially to hold somebody account. And so I originally reached out to him. I sent him a couple of letters, and he hired a PR person to deal with me. And they kind of strung me along for many weeks about whether he would speak to me. In the end, he decided not to. And so I was left, talking to people who knew him, including Scott Walker, the former governor of Wisconsin, and also doing my own kind of snooping around. I found a friend who told the story of how Todd Ricketts, had lauded Pinochet, who was the dictator in Chile, and when pushed on the brutality of that regime, dismissed it by just saying people died, which I think for me was really kind of telling. And I also went on his Facebook page. I was surprised he had his Facebook page up, but he was referring to the coronavirus as the Kung flu weeks before Trump was. So part of it, and I kind of expected that, people like Todd Ricketts are getting what they want from Trump, the deregulation, the conservative judicial appointments, the reduction in taxes, and for them, in some ways, the end justifies the means. But I also think on some level he shares some of the sensibilities. The piece, more than anything, raises the sort of question about how one reconciles enthusiastically supporting a president who traffics in racist and anti-immigrant rhetoric while being the owner of a baseball team, where a third of the players in the league are foreign-born, where race is at the fore. And so it's a piece that really tries to ask that question. Yeah, it's online now. So
I was going to ask,
yeah.
so if we search for.
It just came out yesterday, so it's online.
Fantastic. Okay, we all have our reading assignment tonight now. That's great.
Very heartrending, Alex. When you said that, I thought, his support. Just reading this past summer, Elon Musk supporting the violent coup in Bolivia, and on Twitter he said we can coup whoever we want. And the recent events in Bolivia where the old moderate or left-wing government was able to democratically take control again. You're right. I immediately thought about that and sort of the the monoculture and how does that affect our writing, and how this, like you said, do people get away with this?
Right.
I love that, and I need to read it, Alex. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the piece is a very straight ahead reported piece. I mean, there's nothing fanciful about it. I just really felt like I just needed to have this, that we needed to have it on the record, who he is. But yeah, I mean, I think Trump has kind of given license to sort of voice things that I think 4 years ago people may have thought, but never would have spoken publicly about.
Yeah, this is so. I'm going to find this tonight and read it. This is fantastic. So if we search for, what's the title of the article?
It's called Trump's collides with the world of baseball. I think that's right.
If we Google Trump baseball, Alex Kotlowitz, we'll find it.
New Yorker. Yeah, that would do it. Yeah.
All right. So we have a question from Karen Dornibus, who is herself a wonderful Chicago author. And the question is, it sounds like all of us are channeling the emotions of the pandemic into your work, channeling the emotions into our work rather than addressing the pandemic directly in your current work. But do you anticipate an onslaught of fiction or nonfiction that more literally addresses the pandemic?
Yes.
Sure.
I've been trying to think a lot about the Columbian Exchange and how increasingly with, when you have the Spanish and the Portuguese empires, coming upon the New World, and we've sort of reached another Columbian Exchange for sorts where viruses spread across the globe very quickly. We all know the consequences of global warming and global change. I think it's happening right now, and if it is exactly addressing the pandemic, I think it's going to become very international, very quick, these themes through literature. And I think we're seeing that already. I also think I keep going back. I don't know if I'm feeling it tonight to just keep talking about Latin American literature, but I also think so much of that has been existing in Latin American literature for the past 30, 40 years, because you have this sort of like deep memory of the solidarities and the pain and the trauma of what happens when worlds collide quite instantly. And I think Trump might be our very sort of first virtual president. And I think it makes perfect sense that when we sort of view our current stage, we're at once very virtual, once very isolated, but I feel like we're in the midst of another kind of Columbian Exchange. And I hope to address that through the lens of ecology, but I do think it's happening quite quickly and right now. I haven't met a writer or artist who hasn't been transformed, I think, materially or sort of psychologically by these events. And I hate to predict anything except a renaissance within the next 20 years because of it, for better or worse.
But I don't know, I kind of guess, I hope in some ways that novelists kind of steer away from writing about this moment. I mean, I feel like it's such a shared moment that I don't know personally whether I want to go back and read about what I already know. Yeah. I went early on, I went back to look at what had been the last shared moment I could think of, really where people had kind of viscerally experienced, they had a shared experience, was the Depression. World War II was people were going off to war, but the Depression. And it was interesting when you look at the literature that came out right after the Depression. I just looked at the bestseller list. I mean, there are novels that I just don't recognize. And interestingly, Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, which is kind of the hallmark of that, came out, I think, 10 or 12 years after the Depression. So I guess I turn to you guys not to help me make sense of this moment, but to, as Chloe said earlier, in some ways to kind of transport me elsewhere. And the beauty of novels is that in doing that, they get you to think about the present, and thinking about the future or the past. It brings us back to this moment. But I don't know. I guess I'm inclined, just for what it's worth, I'm inclined that I would hope, I'm looking to read books that aren't don't bring me back to this moment in time.
I guess we're in novelist time, which is 10, 20 years after the event.
Yes.
That's right. That's right.
It's funny, right when things were starting. Oh, Chloe, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think, this is going to be in the soil of every novel that comes after it in some way. And I hope that, that we fiction writers can give ourselves permission to address it directly or not, in whichever ways it's sort of coming up for us. People, this is just a quick aside about The Immortalist. People often ask me about the inspiration for the book, and I've always felt like I don't have a good story to explain where it came from, because it's really sort of about a lifetime of neuroses caused in part by having chronic pain. But there's not a headache in the book. And it's only been in looking back that I realized how the entire book was shaped by anxiety about mortality that came from a chronic health issue. And so I just use that as an example of the way that a seed can turn into something very different than, it seems like it might, the way that it's like something goes into the head and then there's some elaborate like recombobulation process, and then it comes out as something different, but completely impacted by.
Just how we dream too.
True. Well, yeah, that's very true.
Yeah.
I think that there's actually that's a really perfect analogy.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a lot of what we're doing is we're just having, as a novelist, as a fiction writer, you're having sort of an extended dream for 3 to 5 years, letting your subconscious go to town. It's funny, one thing that I think a lot of people are dealing with is like anyone who was writing a story set in the present day is now having to go, okay, well, do I move it or do I deal with face masks? Like just on this logistical level, I'm dealing with that. But the other thing, when everything started in March, April, May, I kept looking for, okay, what are the great novels about the 1918 influenza? And there just really aren't. Like I can think of one great short story by Lauren Groff, so that was like written, 10 years ago. But like the people who were there, what they wrote about it, I was like, this, teach us, tell us what it was like. And there's just not. So I do hope, if nothing else, that a couple, some people write some great novels about this so that 50 years from now, when our children are like, I had to stay home from school in the pandemic, and their grandchildren are like, but the people, will have something to pick up that would tell them something about what we learned.
Yeah, and it get like you said, face masks. I was thinking I was having a conversation with a friend and about world building. When you have speculative worlds or science fiction worlds, and we kind of came to this point where it's unnecessary because the singular exterior metaphor of a face mask is enough to build a world. We don't have to worry about the technology. We don't have to worry about some future sense if we're, because that singular detail floats up so substantially and it's all you need. So I thinking about writing so differently, just like, like Chloe said, it gets in your brain, it mixes around, and then just the singular image of the face mask would be enough to write an entire novel or novella, I think, without the world building.
It's kind of like the cell phone in terms of like, writing after cell phones was totally different than writing before, because you're like, crap, there's no suspense. Everybody can get a hold of each other. Like, what do you do if you're a mystery writer? Like, people can text. Yeah. So I think there are these junctures where, it becomes a decision not to pretend as though cell phones or masks aren't a part of the picture.
That's the fun game, you guys all know. Like you watch reruns of Seinfeld and you ruin every episode. See how quickly you could ruin it with a cell phone. Be like, they can just figure out where they left their car. They can just call each other. Be like, I'm at the other movie theater. Like everything gets solved instantly.
I think Curb Your Enthusiasm answered what that would look like.
Yeah, basically, yeah. And it just makes more of a mess, right? Yeah. Well, maybe one thing I'll end by saying here is, speaking of masks, that I think one of the joys of Zoom is seeing the bottom halves of people's faces I'm loving everyone's chins tonight and their mouths. It's great. And I don't know if someone from Ragdale maybe wants to say a closing word or not, but I will at least say, first of all, huge thanks. Sam Lewis did a lot of work putting this together. Caroline Older and Gina Park, the head of the Board of Trustees, did all kinds of work putting this together. A small simulacrum of the experience you might have at Novel Affair. If you've never been to Novel Affair, just, make a mental note. Hopefully next spring, next fall, sometime in there, we'll get you all here. Look up Alex's article tonight, but also some great books to order from your local independent bookstore, like the Lake Forest bookstore, for instance. An American Summer, Love and Death in Chicago by Alex, The Immortalists, Chloe's novel, which you've probably already read. So if you've already read that, you could order The Anatomy of Dreams, her first one. And The Lost Book of Adana Moreau, which is a beautiful hardcover right now. That was Mike's debut. And Caroline, do you want to say goodbye or anything, or Sam, or should we?
Oops.
Oh, but you're muted, yeah.
I'm unmuting myself. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to our authors, to Chloe, to Michael, to Alex, to Rebecca for, a wonderful conversation. And while, of course, we would love to be seeing everyone in person, we are thrilled to be joining you all by Zoom. And as Rebecca noted, seeing the lower halves of everyone's faces. But we hope everyone enjoys reading as a way to get through these times. We so value our authors and our artists for leading us forward in challenging circumstances. So thank you for your time tonight. Thank you for joining us, everyone. And we hope you'll join us back at Ragdale for some other events that we have coming up in October that you can find on our website related to Halloween. So
thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
guys.
much. Great night.
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah,
Thank you, everyone.
thanks.